Welcome to the Brain Coffee Podcast, where doctors Eric Luthard and Albert Kim unlock life's little mysteries about health, wellness, entertainment, technology, and how the brain makes sense of it all. Sit back, relax, and open up your mind.
Halloween is coming up.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I think it's interesting. It's a holiday around the macabre, things that scare us, ghouls
Exactly.
and goblins.
People
And,
celebrating getting scared.
you know, it's interesting how we are drawn to it or drawn to the stuff that gives us the most fear. The only thing is, you know, I can't watch scary movies late at night.
Oh, you don't like scary movies? I love scary movies.
Really?
Yeah.
I like action or whatever, but the Exorcist type of movies, I won't sleep. Like the movie that scared me the most, do you remember the Blair Witch Project?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Like
that was
that
a good movie.
just set me through the roof. Like
Yeah.
I remember like not being able to sleep the entire night after that.
Yeah, that movie is scary for sure, and I love that movie. But it's funny how also you're not in the forest. You're at home in your bed in an urban setting, and you're still
Right.
scared.
And you're still scared. Well, because I think one of the interesting things about it is that, especially when I think about the Blair Witch Project, or even actually, let's even kind of reduce it to something more fundamental. I remember being a kid, and
Yeah.
you're scared of the dark,
Oh, yeah.
right? And I think there's something fundamental about the scariest movie or the dark room. You create the horror show in your own mind,
Right.
Like, but you actually never saw the monster in the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, like Alfred Hitchcockian movie making.
Right.
You don't show the scariest part,
Right.
but your brain thinks
your
it's
brain
scary.
creates it.
Right,
and
right.
I think that, and it speaks to something interesting about our evolution in that our brain is built to fill in the gaps, right?
Right.
You know, so if there's that, we will build it. And so if you've got a really big gap and a few cues that are saying there's danger, you will create the biggest, scariest monster in your own brain more than any other movie could create.
That's absolutely true. But I mean, it also makes me think of why we have that whole process to beginning with the fear process, you know?
Certainly it's survival. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're probably in the dark in a cave. There's a bear next door, like next to us, maybe.
Right.
And then things go off in our brains and make certain things happen. You know, fight or flight response.
Right,
You know,
right.
we've talked about this. You know, your pupils get bigger, so you can see more light probably. Your heart races, your blood pressure goes up.
So you can run.
Yeah, exactly. Blood goes to your muscles and your heart more so in those circumstances.
But it's a really interesting thing. Like, you know, why are we scared of the dark? Because, you know, back, 100,000 years ago, there were things that could eat us in the dark.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
think
Like,
that was probably
and
legitimate, right?
And that was a legitimate, like survival instinct. And
Yeah.
that translates to today. Meaning that, like, our, hunter-gatherer heritage is what leads us to kind of really being afraid. Is, you know what? When we do hear that little tappity tap or that knock on the wall or something like that,
Right.
that, again, 100,000 years ago, maybe that was a puma getting ready to pounce. you know?
Exactly. You know, there's like a related thing. I actually don't know the basis of this, but you know, in scary movies, they also generate this really low-pitched noise during scary scenes, and that it fills you with this feeling of dread. And people know this. I mean, directors know this, but I don't know exactly the underpinnings of it. But I'm wondering what the evolutionary correlate of
That's interesting.
of the low-pitched sound of dread might be. I don't know.
I wonder if it's like, the growl of a bear or the growl of a
Yeah. Or maybe like earthquakes or something. I wonder. It's interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Or maybe it has to do with you both hear a loud bass, but you feel it.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, it's that vibrating sense of like, kind of like, it makes you think like, is there like the T-Rex stomping towards you? You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That's probably true. We're supposed to see the puddles with the ripples going through when the T-Rex is stomping and the ground is shaking.
We feel that, you know what I mean? Like, again, 100,000 years ago, maybe you felt like when something heavy was coming your way. You know what I mean? And that made you really uncomfortable.
Yeah, that might be true. So now movie directors use all these sort of evolutionarily hardwired emotions and processes to scare us. So, and that's kind of a funny thing. Why would I want to, subject myself to that? That's kind of funny.
It's interesting, and people like to get that horror show feeling, and
Right.
so, why exactly does somebody want to have? And maybe it's this, like, why do you jump out of an airplane? Like, like you like the thrill of it, but with the knowledge that you can come back from it.
Right. So you have to know that you're in a reasonably safe zone while experiencing that.
Right.
And then it gives you pleasure, I guess, in some way, right?
Like knowing that, like, you can observe something, but not have to suffer the consequences. So, for instance, you would like to see a scary movie about dinosaurs, but if given the opportunity, you don't want to be put in a lion's cage. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like a real
Right.
lion's cage.
Yeah,
that would be a
that's right.
problem. Like that's scary, but not entertaining.
So, but a lot of people can't go to scary movies. I mean, like, my wife hates scary movies.
Likewise, yeah.
Yeah. And so I mean, why is it that some people can't reason that they're not in an unsafe situation? It's not dangerous in a movie theater. I mean, mostly.
Maybe it has something to do a little bit with empathy, meaning that, and empathy is maybe a slightly wrong word, but this.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Empathy is generally a feeling of connectedness with another person or another environment, right? And the degree to which you can suppress your empathy allows you to experience a horror show because you know you're not connected to them. But people who I think are more empathetic, I wonder if they're, my partner, she's a pediatric surgeon, so she's really connected to kids. She has a lot of empathy.
I see.
And I wonder if like there's this relationship between entertainment with a horror show and empathy, where basically if you really connect with the characters, like, it really causes you physical pain to see kind of something bad happen. Whereas if you're, maybe say a neurosurgeon, you're like, well, I can set these things aside.
I compartmentalize
I can compartmentalize, and it doesn't affect me as deeply as it would somebody with, more, empathetic connections.
No, I think you're right, because we are specifically tuned to be able to detect fear in other people's faces. It's not only like we're scared of a situation. We detect fear in someone else's face, and we process that. We have, again,
it's an innate
circuits,
thing. Right. That's it. I mean, it's basically, just to talk about the anatomy.
Yeah,
it's very interesting that, again, fear comes from those little almond-like nuclei in our brain called the amygdala. Right. And those are connected to some fascinating interconnections where basically they're connected to kind of our hippocampus, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the circuits responsible for our memory. That's why when you have something scary that happens in your life, you never forget it. Right. But they also, I think, connect to a number of areas associated with emotional regulation and basal forebrain and pleasure. So it has all to do with kind of human interactions.
Right. So it can recognize fear in other faces, and so maybe
actually, facial recognition is a very specific place in the basal portion of the temporal lobe.
Right.
So people can have injuries there and can't recognize faces anymore after that.
So apparently there's this patient out there, I think it's a woman, who can recognize her friends and family, but then she can't detect fear in their faces.
I remember hearing about this.
Yeah.
She's a woman who basically, I think congenitally, was born without amygdala.
Yeah, it's some kind of a injury to the amygdala. I think you're right. I don't remember.
I can't remember the exact story, but basically, like she fundamentally doesn't process fear.
Right, exactly. So she can't detect it in other people. I heard she's also not scared of movies. I don't know.
Go
exactly
figure.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah. Go figure. Like her amygdala. She doesn't have that fear activating element. But I guess it's also interesting. Sometimes people, wonder, like, well, why do we have fear in the first place? Clearly, from an evolutionary standpoint, it's a survival mechanism, right?
Oh, yeah.
It avoids us, getting injured, or it allows us to avoid dangers. But I guess, I think it's interesting in the modern context how, while we don't have tigers jumping out at us anymore, we have digital tigers, and kind of like our digital environment is always jumping out at us these days, right? And so our evolutionary mechanisms may contribute to higher levels of anxiety today.
Yeah, that's true.
Because of threat warnings. Like, again, you just look at the news and everything's always, something bad's always happening.
No, you're right. And it's funny. You can argue then that the people who, the sort of the scaredy cats out there,
right?
Maybe they're the most evolutionarily fit. They're the ones that would have run away from all the tigers, all the T-Rexes, and
they would have survived and procreated.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Right.
So that's who we are now.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. But I guess the interesting, like taking it to another extreme, is there are people who get confronted with real world, life-threatening things, such as the military.
Oh yeah.
And I think the notion of kind of how that operates in PTSD is really interesting. A classic example is a soldier is going on a truck, and an IED blows up coming out of a garbage can, right? He gets injured, he's traumatized by that experience, but now anytime he goes past a garbage can, he gets that overwhelming sense of fear.
He even has a flashback, like a real flashback of the event as well.
And that whole kind of component of his amygdala, not only connecting to kind of his brain, but also his physiology, connecting to his brainstem that's causing his sympathetic nervous system, his heart rate to jump, and it's debilitating. And
yeah, exactly. You can't function in normal society. Yeah,
it's a really interesting thing of like having this balance of you need to have some fear, right? And some fear can even be entertaining, but too much of it is really disabling. So you need to find this appropriate equilibrium for how you're managing your fear response to your environment.
I agree. I mean, it's kind of interesting to think about what normal should be then, too. I mean, you said before, and it happens to me, you see a scary movie, you go home, you're obviously not in that environment anymore, and you're still scared. you lose sleep.
There's a lingering effect. Again, I still remember the Blair Witch Project. I couldn't sleep that night. And I was so terrified. Getting back onto this idea of kind of our fascination and our avoidance of fear-related topics. I mean, Halloween, it's all about death, right?
Yeah, it's a portal into another dimension, right into the spirit world, the world of the dead. Isn't that what it's?
That's right.
Hallows Eve or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Samhain or something.
Right, and certainly, St. Louis is huge on Halloween, where basically, again, it's the home of the Exorcist.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know.
Yeah.
So, I love that movie, but I didn't know this connection.
Yeah. So apparently, the story that led to the creation of that, happened at St. Louis University, where kind of the exorcism. It wasn't a girl; it was a boy.
Okay.
But basically happened in I think it was DeBerg Hall.
Wow.
I think the family was from North St. Louis. It happened locally, right? And
that's incredible.
And I think actually that the whole area where they did the exorcism was cordoned off and sealed off for a long, long time. I think that building may be torn down now, but it was So it has the Exorcist has St. Louis roots, which, by the way, was another incredibly scary movie.
Yeah, no, I have to. I mean, I love scary movies, but that movie creeps me out to no end. I agree.
And it's interesting again, getting back to this Halloween thing, how kind of especially this, for instance, Satan movies really freak me out.
Yeah,
even though are there really demons and devils and stuff I don't know. But
exactly. Who can say?
But it really sets it on a different level. And again, I wonder what is that about our cultural or evolutionary history? Why that spiritual element to fearsome adds another dimension. So for instance, okay, lions and tigers and dinosaurs, they're scary, right?
Yeah.
And we can go to watch Jurassic Park and we get a thrill and we can get a little bit scared. And there's threat, and there's but then there's the element, then you go to The Exorcist.
Right, dark forces, spiritual forces.
Dark forces, and I always wonder, is there a different brain physiology or a definite evolutionary brain physiology that's really tapping into an additional element of why you should be really, really scared?
Right. I mean, we certainly have a different mental construct to deal with things like that, spiritual, religious. I mean, in some sense, it's the ultimate unknown, and maybe that's what we're really scared of, right?
Right. Well, it's the biggest, darkest room that we have.
Exactly.
Right? Meaning that again, we fill in the blanks with dark rooms. And so thinking about this really, really big dark room is it's not just our physical bodies that are at risk now; it's our souls.
Exactly.
Right. Our
exactly.
ultimate fundamental existence that gets put into play when you get to a Satan movie.
Right. And so we want to know that our souls continue on. I mean, in some sense, like ghosts, or maybe in another place, like a heaven or a hell.
Right. And so when it's threatened, when it's not just that we die, that's scary, but when our very existence, that thing that can potentially transition death, is also threatened in the setting of an exorcist or something else.
Yeah, that's right.
Then it's on, right? As far as being super duper scary.
I agree. It definitely amps up the fear. But back to the ghost thing.
Yeah.
So, you're not always thinking about your death, but I could see how our musings about death and our really inherent fears about dying can lead to people believing in ghosts. Ghosts are, there are ghost tales everywhere, every culture.
It's quite literally ubiquitous throughout culture in every part of the world. Certainly there's a theology and a religious sense, and there's some sense of kind of something that happens after death.
Right.
And that translates to lore about ghosts, and again, everywhere. Whether you're on the Easter Islands or you're in Ireland or you're in the U.S. And so it's a fundamental part of our belief system. And I think again, it's biologic in nature, where we have an intrinsic need to our brain probably for our evolutionary survival to believe that there's something beyond ourselves, beyond our biology.
It's an interesting thing how that idea has taken different forms in people who think differently about the world. You have the sort of a spiritual religious view of ghosts, and then you can have, sure you thought it's, and other people think of it in a science fiction way, right? A different dimension where we go, or something like that, right? It's interesting.
So you can think about it, like you said, like the mythological, theological, ghosts. Are there some? Is there some kind of non-physical, metaphysical element? Then you can say, well, or is it aliens from dimension X, right?
Yeah.
Or you can say, is this a biologic manifestation? So, for instance, could ghosts or the perception of ghosts be related to some type of seizure?
Yeah. That definitely happened in the past, yeah.
Yeah, and it used to be people who had epilepsy were considered almost divine in nature, right? That God
Joan
was,
of Arc and
that God was touching them, and then and they had these moments of being filled with energy, and again, smaller levels of that you can create artificial visual perceptions.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, people have that all the time in psychosis as well, right? With delusions and hallucinations. But
or
maybe that's
even schizophrenia.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like, schizophrenics see things that aren't there all the time.
Right. But that, going back to what you're saying, probably taps into something fundamental about our brain physiology.
That's right.
The way our wanting to believe that in some way, right?
That's right. That it's a fundamental element to our brain. The way our brain's configured is that it's part of kind of the way we're wired to have a notion for something beyond the physical, or maybe again, our brain has to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, right.
Right.
In uncertain things.
In uncertainty, our brain has to fill in the gaps, whether it's the dark room, or it's we can't explain this reality in any such way.
Right.
Our brain has to fill in the gaps, and whether that's ghosts, or goblins, or whatever.
We do that all the time. Vision, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Our brains are made to fill in the gaps, like you said.
Well, I mean, again, the most concrete example is the blind spot we have in our eyes, like meaning that every human being has two blind spots, right?
Where the optic nerve goes into the retina.
That's right.
We don't have sensing cells there, right?
We can't see, and we are quite literally blinded. But our brain stitches the environment around that blind spot together. So when we look at the world, we never see that. Exactly. We don't see these two dark spots, and our brain, on that level, it's stitching it together. And I think that's probably true for all these other quote unquote blind spots that we have in our ability to understand reality.